The vote counter in the corner of the chamber read 11 minutes, and falling when Councillor Serath Dun first understood that they were about to kill the wrong person. She had been in her seat for 6 hours by then, 6 hours of the Galactic Compact's emergency threat assessment protocol, which had begun before dawn with an intelligence brief, and had proceeded with the grinding, procedural thoroughness that the Compact applied to everything, including decisions about whether to authorize a targeted strike on a vessel carrying a human crew. The chamber was a sealed deliberation room, not the main floor. 12 councillors, the intelligence liaison, a Compact security deputy, and a countdown clock that had been running since the protocol began. 11 minutes. The vote window was non-negotiable. When the clock reached 0, the authorization order would either carry a quorum signature or it would not. If it carried 1, the Compact's enforcement vessel, already positioned 11,000 kilometers from the human ship, would fire. The human vessel was called the Varden. It was a medical transport, according to its registered classification. The intelligence liaison's brief described it as carrying a modified biological agent inside its secure cargo hold. Evidence assembled from 3 intercepts, 2 thermal imaging scans, and a report from a Compact listening post that had flagged unusual energy readings consistent with cryogenic preservation units of the type used to maintain biological samples at containment temperatures. The brief was thorough. The brief was presented with confidence. The intelligence liaison had been presenting exactly this kind of brief for 19 years, and the room had been receiving them the same way, reading, nodding, asking procedural questions about thresholds and enforcement authority, preparing to vote. Serath Dun had spent most of the 6 hours not asking the question that had been sitting in the center of her mind since the 2nd hour, because the question was not a comfortable one to ask in an emergency protocol session, where the answer was already taking shape around the table, and because she was a junior seat on the Compact's 7th Council, and because the intelligence liaison had a career's worth of standing in this room and she did not. 10 minutes and 20 seconds. She asked it. What is the medical classification of the vessel's crew? The intelligence liaison looked at her. He was a tall Vel male, gray-skinned and deliberate, with the specific variety of patience that senior officials in intelligence positions develop. The patience of a person who has given the same briefing to many rooms and knows exactly how each question fits into the standard sequence of concerns. The crew, he said, is 5 individuals. The manifest lists them as civilian medical technicians contracted under a standard Compact transit permit. Their precise medical certifications are not. What are their ages? A pause, brief, careful. The manifest does not specify individual ages, Councillor. The transit permit does, Serath Dun said. I have the permit in front of me. It lists crew ages as a standard field. The oldest crew member on the Varden is 23 years old. The youngest is 17. The room was quiet. Not the silence of agreement, the silence of a room that has been interrupted mid-procedure by something it was not expecting and is recalibrating. The security deputy spoke first. Councillor Dun, the age of the crew does not affect the evidentiary assessment of the cargo. No, she said, it doesn't. She looked at the documents in front of her, the permit, the intelligence brief, the thermal imaging analysis summary, which she had been rereading for the last 40 minutes with the specific attention of someone who knows that the nagging sensation in their chest is pointing at something. I want to ask about the thermal imaging analysis. 9 minutes 15 seconds. The analysis is addressed in Section 4 of the brief, the liaison said. Section 4 identifies the cryogenic energy signature and notes that it is consistent with biological containment units. She turned the page. It does not note that the same energy signature is also consistent with standard-issue human long-term pharmaceutical storage systems. Human-registered medical transports operating under Compact permits are required by Compact Regulation 14 to carry a cold chain pharmaceutical reserve adequate for the crew's full transit duration, plus a 30% buffer. The energy signature would be identical. The liaison looked at her. His expression did not change in any way that could be described as a flinch, but something moved behind it, the very slight movement of a person who has just heard an argument they had not anticipated and is evaluating whether they should have. "The intercepts," he said. "The communication intercepts corroborate the cargo characterization." "The intercepts are flagged as Level 2 inference," Serath Dun said. "That means they are indirect. They do not directly describe cargo contents." She looked at the document. Intercept 1 is a communication from the vessel to a port authority requesting extended docking clearance for sensitive cargo in controlled conditions. Intercept 2 is a communication between two of the crew members discussing temperature protocols. Intercept 3, she stopped. She had almost said it the way she had been thinking it, flatly, as an observation. She made herself say it as a question, because a question was something the table could work with. Does Intercept 3 actually identify a bioweapon? The text in Section 4 says it confirms suspicious cargo activity. But the actual intercept text in the appendix says the crew member was asking for a thermal audit log because the readings have been inconsistent, and the supply officer will want documentation. 8 minutes 4 seconds. The deputy leaned forward slightly. "Counselor, the analysis was prepared by the Compact's senior threat assessment team. They reviewed all 3 intercepts in context." "I'm asking what the intercepts say," she said, "not what they were assessed to mean." There was a longer silence. Around the table, she could feel the weight of 11 other counselors, some of them watching her, some of them looking at their own documents again with the particular focus of people who are rereading something they had already decided to accept. The Authorization Order sat in the center of the table, waiting for signatures. Serath Dun thought about the youngest crew member on the Varden, 17 years old, registered medical technician. The permit listed her name, Mara Solis. There was nothing else in the permit about her except her age, her technician certification number, and her current position as crew on a medical transport traveling toward a Compact-affiliated port station to deliver pharmaceutical supplies to a civilian hospital that was, according to the port registry, running low on long-term oncology treatments. 7 minutes. "The listening post energy reading," Serath Dun said. Section 3. The post logged the energy signature at 2.3 Kelvin deviation above standard pharmaceutical storage range. The brief characterizes this as significant. "I would like to know what the standard deviation tolerance is for human pharmaceutical cold chain systems in transit." No one answered immediately. The liaison checked something on his access terminal. The check took longer than it should have. "The standard tolerance for human cold chain pharmaceutical systems in transit," he said, after a silence that had stretched far enough to become something other than a pause, "is plus or minus 3.1 Kelvin. The 2.3 deviation was inside the tolerance band." The room understood this before anyone said it. Serath Dun watched it happen, watched 12 senior officials in a sealed deliberation chamber, process the fact that the most precisely quantified element of the intelligence brief, the one that had been presented as the technical anchor of the evidentiary case, was within the normal operating range of the equipment the vessel was already required by regulation to carry. 6 minutes 30 seconds. "I am requesting a suspension of the protocol clock," Serath Dun said. "Under Article 7, Section 2, any counselor may request a clock suspension pending evidentiary review if new material analysis is presented in session. I am presenting this as new material analysis." The security deputy opened his mouth. She kept going. "I am not suggesting the intelligence team acted improperly. I am suggesting that the threat assessment was prepared under time pressure, that the 3 intercepts were analyzed for worst-case consistency rather than alternative hypothesis testing, and that the thermal analysis anchor sits within normal operating parameters for the cargo the vessel is required by regulation to carry. She looked at the authorization order. If we sign that order and the vessel is carrying oncology pharmaceuticals for a civilian hospital and 5 medical technicians between the ages of 17 and 23, we will have killed them. That fact will not care what the brief said. That fact will exist in the record, and it will exist in the space where the Varden was. 6 minutes. The senior counselor, Weth Anvar, gray-robed and 60 years in the chamber, looked at her across the table. His expression was not hostile. It was the expression of a man who had been in many protocol sessions and knew the specific weight of the moment she was creating. "Councillor Dun," he said carefully, "the clock suspension requires a second." She waited. The silence stretched. 4 seconds. 8 seconds. She could feel the authorization order on the table between them, feel the weight of the intelligence team's months of work, feel the particular institutional gravity of a process that had been moving in one direction for 6 hours and had not been designed to stop. She did not look away from Anvar. He was 60 years in the chamber. He had seconded clock suspensions before, in other sessions, in other rooms. She did not know what those moments had cost him. She did not know what this one was costing him now, whether he was calculating political exposure or the liability of a signed authorization on a wrong intelligence call, or whether some older instinct was working in him, some version of the same thing that was working in her. The 17-year-old name on the permit, the pharmaceutical delivery record for the oncology ward, the 2.3 Kelvin deviation that sat inside the normal range. To her left, one of the senior counselors was already reaching toward the order. Not reaching for a pen, just reaching, the way hands move toward familiar objects when a room has been building toward a single conclusion for 6 hours. The authorization order had been sitting in the center of the table since hour 1. Everyone in the room had been reading it, amending it, revising its language to be more precise, more legally defensible, more careful about the threshold language around certainty. It was a thorough document. It would have been a thorough mistake. 5 minutes, 40 seconds. "Seconded," said Weth Anvar. The protocol clock stopped at 5 minutes and 37 seconds. The evidentiary review took 9 hours. The Compact's independent verification team pulled the Varden's port records, cross-referenced the pharmaceutical delivery against the hospital's supply requisitions, and ran a direct scan with full spectrum analysis, rather than the long-range thermal read that the listening post had taken. The cold chain units on board contained flumaretine, Carotavex, and a batch of restricted access oncology treatments, whose shipment codes matched exactly the hospital's outstanding order, logged and confirmed 11 days before the intelligence brief had been prepared. The authorization order was withdrawn. The enforcement vessel was stood down. The Compact's liaison filed an amended assessment categorizing the Varden's cargo as pharmaceutical stores pending physical verification, which was the administrative language for having been wrong. The Varden docked without incident 3 days later. The security deputy sent the hospital's oncology ward a formal notification that there had been a procedural review of the vessel's transit clearance, which was the language the Compact used when it declined to explain what had actually happened. The crew of the Varden received no notification at all, which meant that a 17-year-old medical technician named Mara Solis arrived at her docking port with her pharmaceutical consignment intact, logged her hours, and went asleep on the station without knowing that 6 days earlier, a sealed room of 12 officials had been 11 minutes from signing her death warrant on the basis of a thermal reading that fell within normal range. Serath Dun read the verification report in her office at the end of the 9th hour. She sat with it for a while before she filed it, not because she was uncertain. The report was clear, and the outcome was correct, and she knew that. But because the clock had read 5 minutes and 40 seconds when Weth Anvar had seconded her suspension request, and 5 minutes and 40 seconds was not a long margin, and she had been a junior seat for 8 months and had almost not said anything at all. The intelligence team was already preparing a second brief, on a different vessel, flagged through a different listening post, using the same 3-intercept methodology. She requested a copy of the evidentiary standards framework that the team applied to alternative hypothesis testing. They told her it was still being finalized. She marked the response and filed it alongside the verification report, and then she drafted a formal request to the 7th Council Chair to schedule a methodology review before the next emergency protocol session was convened. The chair's office acknowledged receipt. It took 11 days to get a meeting on the calendar. She took the meeting, and she brought the report, and she brought the numbers, and she sat across from the chair in an ordinary council anteroom with no countdown clock and no authorization order on the table, just the evidence and the framework, and the question of what the process was supposed to do when it got the answer wrong. The chair listened. He did not sign anything that day. He told her the review would take time. She told him she understood. She left his office and walked back down the corridor toward her seat in the 7th Council, and she did not feel vindicated. Vindicated was not what this was. The record had been made. The methodology question was now formally in front of someone who could act on it. A name on a transit permit was attached to a person who had arrived safely. That was the accounting she had. It was enough to keep working from. It was not enough to stop worrying. She went back to her seat and began reading the next brief.